She returned the key on a Sunday evening, when the light through the hallway window had gone that particular October shade. Not quite gold, not quite gone. I opened the door, and she was standing there with it in her palm. The small piece of blue electrical tape I'd wrapped around it 14 months ago, still intact, still exactly where I'd put it. Her expression was the one I had come to understand meant she had decided something and was not fully at peace with the decision, composed at the surface, but with something underneath it that hadn't been resolved. She said, "I can't keep this." I said, "Okay," because that seemed like the right response to give words time to breathe. A pause. In the hallway, from somewhere below, someone was cooking with garlic and olive oil, and the smell had come up through the building in the way smells do in old buildings, through vents, through time, through the general willingness of a 1962 structure to share everything between its floors. She looked at the key, then at me. "It makes me want to stay," she said. I have thought about that sentence every day since. I think about how it arrived before I was ready for it. I think about how I stood in a doorway on a Sunday in October and felt the hallway floor become slightly less stable than hallway floors are supposed to be. I think about how she said it the way people say the true thing when they have finally run out of patience for everything else. It took her 8 months to say it. It took me nearly that long to understand I had been waiting for it. My name is Daniel Rice. I'm 34. I work from home as a data analyst for a mid-sized logistics company, which is exactly the kind of job description that makes conversation at social events very efficient. People hear it, make a polite face, and locate someone else with tremendous speed. It is useful work. It is quiet work. It happens at a desk by the window in an apartment on the 4th floor of a building that was constructed in 1962 and has not been meaningfully updated since. Which means the ceilings are low, the radiators have opinions every February, and the walls between units are thin enough that you know your neighbors in ways that were never explicitly part of the lease. I had intended to know Mara Quinn less than I did. Let me tell you what kind of person I am, because it matters to how this took this long. I am the sort of man who notices things and then argues with himself about what he's noticed. I notice when someone pauses before answering a question they should be able to answer quickly. I notice when a person sets an object down with slightly more care than the situation requires, which usually means the object means something. I notice the difference between the silence of someone thinking and the silence of someone deciding, and I notice it even through walls, which is a skill I had not anticipated developing, but which turns out to be unavoidable when you work in a quiet apartment across the hall from a piano teacher. Mara lived in 4B. 3 feet of carpeted corridor between her door and mine, less distance than it sounds when one of you teaches piano 4 days a week and the other works from home in near silence. She had moved into the building 14 months before the Sunday with the key. I remember the move and date because she had needed help getting the piano through the elevator, and I had been the only person on the floor with a free afternoon and no convincing excuse. It was an upright, dark wood with small dents at the corners that suggested it had been moved before and had feelings about it. It took 40 minutes, the removal of the elevator handrail, and a degree of cooperation between 2 strangers that skips several of the usual stages. At the end of it, she had the piano inside, and I had a pulled muscle in my right shoulder that I told no one about. She made coffee, and we stood in her doorway and said each other's names for the first time. After that, we knew each other's schedules. Then each other's coffee habits. She drank hers black, which I had never witnessed before in a person who otherwise seemed reasonable. Then we knew the specific sounds of each other's mornings, her students arriving at 2, the scales before each lesson, the corrective patience in her voice through the wall, the way my chair scraped when I stood up, which she told me later she had used to know when I was taking a break and she could knock if she needed something. She taught 4 days a week. On the other days, she played for herself. I learned to tell the difference in the first month. Student sessions had a particular rhythm, a phrase repeated, a pause, a correction offered, the phrase again. When she played for herself, the music moved differently. Longer stretches. Stops that weren't corrections, just choices. The quality of playing that has somewhere private in mind and isn't performing for anyone. I spent 14 months not saying anything about the fact that her playing had quietly become the sound my workday organized itself around. The part of the morning that told me things were proceeding correctly. I did not examine this closely. I had a delay. I came to it eventually, but not quickly. This is, historically, my most consistent characteristic. The key came 8 months in. It was a Wednesday in February, the committed kind, gray from first light. Cold enough that the building's radiators were making the particular noise they made when they had decided to actually work, which was loud, but preferable to the alternative. I was leaving for a downtown meeting when I heard the sequence from across the hall. Keys against the lock. A pause. Keys again. Then the specific kind of silence that means a person has located a problem. I knocked. She opened the door, or tried to. The chain was on from the inside. The 4th floor chains on this building sit low, catch easily, and the gap they leave is wide enough to see through and narrow enough to do very little about. She had gone out for something in the morning, come back, and the chain had done what it sometimes did. Through the gap, I have a student at 10. I looked at my phone. 8:43. "Give me a few minutes," I said. The locksmith I called had done a cabinet situation for me once. I'm not going to explain the cabinet situation. And he arrived in 12 minutes, assessed the chain gap with the expression of someone who has seen this exact problem 40 times and finds it only marginally interesting, and had the door open in 20. While we waited, Mara sat cross-legged on the hallway carpet, back against her doorframe. The wide, burnt orange ceramic mug she seemed to carry everywhere in the evenings, now repurposed for morning, full of tea going cold while she ignored it. I sat against my own door. We talked about the building's general attitude toward inconvenience, about the radiators, about the woman on the 2nd floor who had been leaving handwritten grievance letters in everyone's mailbox since October, with the dedication of someone who had found their calling. The locksmith left. Mara had a new key made. She held it out to me with a slight formality that I noticed, and said, "In case this happens again." "I'll do the same," I said. She nodded. "Then it's a system," she said, and went in to get ready for her student. I wrapped a piece of blue electrical tape around my key so I'd know it from my own. Then I went downtown, 12 minutes late for my meeting, and sat through the first 40 minutes of it thinking about the word system and the specific way she had said it. Practically, but not entirely practically. The way you call something a system when the word you might otherwise use is one you're not ready to say out loud. I told myself I was reading too much into a piece of vocabulary. I was competent at telling myself things at that stage of the situation. The thing about the key is that I did not think about it. I want to be accurate here, because accuracy matters. I had a spare key to the apartment across the hall. She had one of mine. This was a sensible arrangement between two people on the same floor of an aging building with hardware that had views. It was a system. I filed it there, and I did not look too closely at what else was in the file. The file, as it emerged, had been doing its own work for months. 3 weeks after February, she came to the door when I knocked. I'd found a package of hers left in the lobby, and I saw the key on her keychain. Among the others, her car, her mother's place in the north, her studio key, and mine. The blue tape still on it, visible, settled among the rest as though it had always been there. Something about seeing it in the context of her actual life, not in the moment of exchange but just there, in daily use, felt different from what I had filed. More permanent than I'd accounted for. I noticed this. I noted it. I moved on in the administrative sense of the phrase, which is not the same as actually moving on, a distinction I had not yet fully grasped. She used the key once, in March, that I know of. I'd mentioned, in one of the hallway conversations that lasted longer than hallway conversations are meant to, that I had a medical appointment, the outpatient kind that requires a driver home and a person to check on you afterward, neither of which I had arranged because I had planned to be completely fine and simply get a cab. I came home to an apartment that was the same as I'd left it, except for two things. The kitchen counter had been wiped down in a way it hadn't been that morning, and there was a pot on the stove with a lid on it, and a note tucked under the handle that said, in her handwriting, soup. Heat on low. Don't be difficult about this. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment and looked at that note. It was the tone of it, not generous in a performing way, not polite in the arm's-length way, the tone of someone who has already considered whether you're going to try to manage without the thing they've made for you, and has preemptively addressed the attempt. The tone of someone who knows you, specifically. I heeded the soup. I did not, for once, argue with myself about what I was noticing. I just noticed it, and let it be what it was. I have poor instincts in situations that require me to be honest about something before I'm ready. I have particularly poor instincts when someone who has quietly been in my thoughts takes up additional space in my kitchen with a note I kept. The second thing was May. I'd been working on a report deadline, the kind that removes you from the experience of time for approximately 4 hours. And when I surfaced at 10:30 and moved to the kitchen, I happened to look out at the building's shared courtyard below. Mara's window faces the courtyard. She was sitting by it. Not working, just sitting, the orange mug in both hands, looking at something outside. She was angled toward the courtyard entrance, which is also roughly the direction of my windows. I made tea and came back. She was still there. I am not going to claim I knew what she was thinking. I am going to note that she sat in that position for a while, and that I noticed, and that the noticing landed differently than I expected it to, and that I stood at my own window for a moment before I went back to the report, and the report took somewhat longer after that than it would have otherwise. The third thing came from Reg. Reg is our building superintendent. He has the social tact of a structural report and delivers information in exactly that spirit, flat, without editorial addition, as though all data has the same weight and should be distributed accordingly. I was in the laundry room in June when he came in to assess the dryer situation and said, "Without preamble, your neighbor asks after you." I said, "Mara?" "Asks when you're traveling," he said, focused entirely on the dryer's internal workings, so she knows when to check your place. "She has a key for that," I said. "She knows," Reg said. He made a small adjustment, nodded at it. "She just likes to know ahead." He left. I stood in the laundry room with damp clothes and the specific sensation of being the last person to understand an arrangement that everyone else had quietly incorporated into their working knowledge of the building. September arrived, and one evening in the hallway, over the orange mug, she mentioned that she was thinking about moving. She said it the way people say things they've been carrying for a while when they've decided the carrying is optional. A friend had a flat available. Better neighborhood, a proper second room, space for a studio. Lower ceilings, she said, but that might be fine. I said, "That sounds like a good opportunity. She looked at me, then at the mug. "It probably is," she said. "Are you going to take it?" A pause. "I haven't decided," she said. She went back inside. I stood in the hallway for slightly longer than I needed to, and then I went in too. That was 2 weeks before the Sunday. In those 2 weeks, she played differently. I would be at my desk and hear it through the wall, longer than usual, later into the evenings, with the quality of music that isn't being practiced or performed, but simply played because not playing it would cost more. The searching kind. On a Thursday night, I heard something I'd never heard her play before. Slow, and without resolution, returning to the same phrase the way you return to a thought you haven't finished. I sat at my desk in the dark and I did not work. I listened. And something in me did the thing it had been doing for months, with increasing persistence. It went across the hall without moving, and it stood at a door. And it stayed there. I understood on that Thursday night that the filing system had been wrong for longer than I'd admitted. That taking note and moving on are not interchangeable. That I had been doing one and calling it the other. 2 days later, she knocked on my door with the key in her hand. She held it out in a way that was slightly formal, both hands, the key resting across her palm, the blue tape still on it, still exactly where I'd put it. "If I'm going to take the flat," she said, "I should give this back first." She paused. "I keep picking it up and putting it back down, and I think that means I should return it before I convince myself of something." I looked at the key. 14 months of it sitting in exactly the right place in her life. "I can't keep this," she said. Then, quieter, the way she played when she wasn't performing, "It makes me want to stay." She heard that. I heard it too. She went still in the specific way of someone whose own sentence has just told them something they'd been going around. I did not reach for the key. I said, "You don't have to give that back." She looked at me. "And you don't have to explain yourself," I said. "If you want the flat, the key doesn't change that. But I'm not going to take it from you to make it easier to leave. That's not something I'm willing to do." A pause. The building settled. Somewhere downstairs, the radiator made its February noise early, which was a new and bold choice for October. She said, slowly, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I've been listening to you play through that wall for 14 months. And there is a specific thing you play when you're thinking about something you haven't decided. You've been playing it for 2 weeks." I looked at her. I should have said something before now. I'm slow. That's mine. But I'm saying it now. She looked at the key in her palm. "I thought you didn't notice," she said. "I notice everything," I said. I argue with myself about it afterward. That's different. A breath, almost a laugh. Her thumb moved across the blue tape once, the gesture she made without knowing she made it. I said, "The flat will still be there. She needs an answer by Friday," Mara said. "Then you'll have one by Friday," I said. "But I wanted you to have the full picture first." She looked at me for a long moment. The hallway was quiet. The October light was nearly gone from the window at the far end. Then she folded her fingers around the key. She put it back in her jacket pocket. Something settled. Nothing dramatic. Just the particular quality of a thing arriving in the right place after traveling further than it needed to. I said, "Do you want to come in?" She said, "I'll need tea." "You never have tea." "I started buying it in March," I said. She went still for a moment. Then her face did the thing, the real expression, the one underneath the composed one, the one I'd seen maybe 4 times in 14 months, and each time understood I was seeing something that wasn't shown to everyone. She said, "The soup." I said, "You left the note." She came in. I put the kettle on. She sat at the kitchen counter on the stool she'd used in all the small moments when she'd come over for a reason and stayed for a longer one. Her wide orange mug on the counter, chipped slightly at the handle now. The piano across the hall quiet for the first time in 2 weeks. The building superintendent told 3 residents he'd called it in June. He was not, it emerged, wrong. 3 months later, she did not take the flat. She called her friend on the Monday, thanked her, said she'd reconsidered. She never told me exactly what she said to explain it. I didn't ask. Some decisions don't need to be filed. She did take the second room in her own apartment, once a storage arrangement with another tenant resolved itself. Better acoustics, she said. She'd been right that the wall between us was thinner than the others. I discovered this on a Tuesday morning when she started playing, and I put down my pen and looked at my screen without seeing it for approximately 4 minutes. I chose not to address this as a problem. A year after the Sunday, the key situation had quietly resolved itself in the way practical things do between 2 people who have stopped pretending the practical is the whole story. She had one. I had one. The blue tape had been replaced twice by then. I kept a roll of it in the kitchen drawer, which had also started to mean something. The orange mug had developed a small chip in the handle that neither of us had mentioned, because it had been there long enough that it was simply part of what the mug was. Years later, when someone asked how it started, she said, "He wouldn't take the key back." Which is very him. I said, "She told me a piece of blue tape made her want to stay." She said, "That is not exactly what I said." I said, "It's what I heard." She picked up the orange mug. She went to put the kettle on. Nothing important had appeared overnight. It had simply stopped hiding.